Good morning. On the screen directly behind him, an old man was smiling out at the audience. His face was smooth and light, his teeth white and perfect, but Ian guessed he must have been in his 80s. He could pick out the telltale evidence of a good plastic surgeon better than anyone. His mother had been addicted to nips and tucks. Welcome, fellow Cahills. That's my line. Ian twisted back, still stabbing at his panel. He searched the room for Kara. The spirit of Grace Cahill guides us as we meet in her beloved library. I am the outcast. Sit back. I have a few things to say. The room was eerily quiet. Everyone was riveted to the man on the screen. Who am I? One of you. The outcast leaned forward. His power didn't come from his erect posture, his big, gnarled hands, or his intense stare. It was something else, and Ian recognized it because he'd grown up with it. It was the ease of a man who knows he's the one with the ace in his pocket. I left the Cahills for a spell. He knitted his hands together. I had to come back, just to ask one question. Excuse me, Ian shouted, but he was drowned out by the thundering voice. Why are you letting children lead you? Ian spotted Kara at the back of the room. He whipped his finger across his throat, telling her to cut the power. She waved frantically, as if to say, I tried. Now that his eyes had adjusted, Ian quickly scanned the room. Aleutian was trained to read the power shifts like surfers could read waves, read facial expressions and postures, notice glances, look for the people who are relaxed, not tense because they knew this would happen. Foreboding hit him like a repeated blows from a hammer. The first two rows, sitting straight, not looking at each other, not puzzled, just waiting. Patricia O. Magnus Hansen. Someone he didn't recognize. A dark-haired, handsome man in his 40s. He was keeping his head turned away slightly, and he wore tinted glasses. And was that man in black-framed, round glasses Toby Griffin, the renowned architect? Next to him sat Melinda Toth, the Aleutian billionaire businesswoman, and sprinkled around the room, others too. They knew this guy, and his father, still on screen. Vikram Kabra leaned back in his chair as if he were lounging. Ian noted the sharp glint in his dark eyes. This was an ambush, and his father was part of it. Ian felt the surprise of hot tears behind his eyes. He was suddenly 7 years old again. He thought of the times he'd run to his father for comfort before he'd learned not to. Young man, there is no need for sniffles. If you bleed, don't look for sympathy. Get yourself a handkerchief and get on with it. We have placed our destiny in the hands of amateurs, the outcast boomed. Grace used to say, if your best instincts are your worst enemies, take your hands off the controls. Find someone else to fly the plane. The outcast clapped his hands together. Grace believed in family, but she didn't suffer fools. In this very room, Grace issued a challenge for a hunt for 39 clues. The challenge was won by her own grandchildren. He held up a hand. I'm not here to suggest that there could have been double dealing, even though it seems remarkable that children could win over the best minds, bodies, skills, and leadership of branch leaders. A murmur ran through the room. Ian saw some heads nodding. "Stop!" Ian yelled. "Let him speak," Patricia O called. "He is making a great deal of sense. The clue hunt was a sham. Because of it, we allowed the young, the untried, to lead us. First, Amy and Dan Cahill, until they got bored and walked away. And now their friend, a pampered boy." The hair stood up on Ian's back as he heard the sound of his father's chuckle. That always meant a bit of cruelty was coming. "I hear our old leader made great changes. He added mirrors to the master suite," Vikram Kabra said. Ian heard laughter ripple through the room. His face burned. "This is insanity, my friends," the outcast cried. "We need to take our family back. It's time for someone else to fly the plane." "What are you suggesting, sir?" Ian shouted, trying to match the outcast's volume and strength. The outcast smiled. It was a chilling smile, as though Ian had walked right into a trap. And he had. An amateur's mistake. He had asked a question that he didn't know the answer to. "I'm so very glad you asked. I propose a test for current leadership." "Yes," Toby Griffin agreed. "What do you have in mind?" Ian stared at him. You already know what he's going to say. So does Magnus, and Patricia, and my father, and Melinda Toth. It's written all over your faces. We are behind many of history's greatest triumphs, the outcast said, but we are also behind some of the biggest disasters. I've chosen 4 of them to replicate. The room was now completely still. Ian swallowed. His eyes raked the room, looking for allies. No one would meet his glance. They were all fascinated by the outcast, hanging on to his every word. And since children are so fond of riddles, we'll start with one each time. Ready? Your first disaster took place at sea. It was sad, rich, and poor. Died in agony. Broke all records of calamity for those still clad in pajamity. A collision caused the terrible losses. In the Maritimes you'll find the crosses. On Mont Blanc rest the ones to blame. Oh, to maim, blind and kill, and have no shame. It will happen again if you can't stop it. At least the Cahill fam will profit. His smile glittered with menace. Cahill leadership has 5 days to guess the disaster and prevent it. No outsiders. If outsiders are brought in or consulted, the deal is off, the disasters take place, and the blood is on your hands. You're crazy, Ian said. No one heard him. He's crazy, he shouted. Couldn't they see the madness glittering in the man's eyes? I'm a fair man, the outcast continued, as if Ian hadn't spoken. "So, I'll give you until sunrise tomorrow to start the clock. Ready, set, go." The screen went black. The lights blazed on. "All right, everybody," Ian said. "Let's calm down. The first step is to discover the identity of that madman." But no one was listening. They were talking quietly. Well, they were talking anxiously, buzzing with concern and questions and statements. Nobody was talking to him. "Fellow Cahills, I think we've had enough of you," Magnus said, standing. As if responding to a signal, the entire first row of Cahills stood. They moved forward. Before he quite knew what was happening, Ian realized that they were flanking him and Kara. On either side of them were athletes from the Thomas branch, all lean, coiled muscle. One woman was famous for swimming the Bering Sea, and there was at least one football player who blocked the rest of the Cahills from interfering. "Just a minute here," Ian started, but they force-marched him out of the room. "Hands off!" Kara shrugged off one of the men who had taken her elbow. "This is a coup!" Ian shouted. He cast one desperate glance back but the rest of the Cahills either seemed frozen or were part of the conspiracy. They marched Ian and Kara down the hallway to the front door. The cold February wind knifed through the doorway as Magnus flung it open. "Mr. Berman!" Ian shouted. "Help us!" He hung on to the doorframe, even though he knew it was undignified. "Mr. Berman!" But Mr. Berman was probably frantically making tea and sandwiches. The pro football player picked him up like kindling wood. "You can either walk or I'll throw you out," he said. Kara's face was pale, but she tossed her hair and strolled out the door. "Come on, Ian," she said in a cool tone. "There are better ways to fight." Ian gazed into the iceberg eyes of Magnus Hansen. "Throw him out anyway," Hansen said. "He needs a lesson." The next thing Ian knew, he was flying through the air. He landed hard on Grace's slate walkway. The shock of the landing rattled his bones. Tears sprang to his eyes from the pain. "Anybody got a tissue?" Magnus laughed. "Wipe your nose, crybaby. Grace's house belongs to the grown-ups now."